Bésame, bésame mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Bésame, bésame mucho, que tengo miedo perderte después.
Well, my friends, that was called Bésame Mucho, which, as I told John during, it means kiss me a lot. It's a bolero, a romantic song written in 1940 and considered one of the most popular songs of all time, one of the most important musical pieces in the history of Latin music. It is the most recorded and covered song in Spanish of all time, was recognized in 1999 as the most sung and performed Mexican song in the world. The real popularity of this genre was built in Mexico during the 1940s and 50s. When I was a boy, it was the golden age of Mexican cinema, and the famous actors were also famous singers who popularized these kinds of songs. So bolero is a timeless musical style that defines the essence of romantic music in Latin America. And there you go. So welcome, fellow Rotarians and guests. Meeting number 5284. Our January birthdays today are the cardiac surgeon Gary Silver, joined us in 1980. Miss Tracy Infantino joined us in 2012. She's with Environmental Systems. Josue Garcia joined us in 2013 as a consultant to construction unions. And Claudia Folzman joined us in 2011 with Iron Construction Incorporated. So happy birthday to all of you. We got Suzanne St. John Crane coming up next. She joined us in 2010. As you know, she's the CEO for American Leadership Forum, and she's the program committee chair. And she's going to share with us her inspirational thought. So, Suzanne, can you come in?
I can. Hi, President Fernando. Hello, Rotarians. Great to see you all. I want to offer an off-the-cuff inspiration and promotion of dialogue. And I was in a conversation a few weeks ago with a national board member for American Leadership Forum, and his name is Lyle. And Lyle is 77 years old. He's a civil rights leader. He lives up in Portland, and he's got quite a history. Lived with, or he was one of the Black Panthers back in the day. He is a guiding light for several civil rights organizations and local governments up in Oregon. And I was in a conversation with him a couple weeks ago, and he said to me, I actually asked him a question. I said, Lyle, how can, and he's an African-American man, I said, how can we ensure that this is a welcoming place for you at ALF's board, our national board? What can we do to better promote equity and inclusion on this organization? And he said, Suzanne, have you ever read or seen the movie Green Book? And I said, God, yes. And he said, I want every place to be listed in the Green Book, right? And ALF is one of those places. And it made me think, can we as Rotarians, can we as human citizens in Silicon Valley ensure that every place in our valley is a place that would be listed in a Green Book? And if you haven't seen that movie, I encourage you to watch it. Better yet, can we get rid of the Green Book? So I want to encourage you today to think about your diversity, equity, and inclusion values in your own personal life and in your workplaces. And thank you, President Fernando, for leading us on that issue and in those values this year.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. Green Book was the book that was published for the African American community as places that were safe for them to stay at, because not all hotels welcomed them and not all restaurants welcomed them. And the Green Book was intended to be kind of a guide for that particular part of our population during the full days of segregation in the South and certainly the rest of the country. I heard last night W. Kamau Bell, who spoke on that very topic of how we can become better citizens by addressing this issue of racism directly and doing what we can to set aside some of these prejudices and give some thought to what white privilege means, and so that we can start to heal this country. So thank you, Suzanne, for bringing that to our attention. Next, we've got an ace columnist, the pride of UC Santa Barbara, our president-elect, and now an outstanding broadcaster, Sal Pizarro. Will you tell us what's going on in San Jose?
Thank you, Fernando.
What's going on? Yeah, what's going
And the first thing, of course, that's going on that we should all be happy about is that the Rotary Play Garden reopened on January 23rd. It was, a rainy and it's currently open weekends, Friday through Sunday, 10 to 4. Masks are required, social distancing is enforced, and they can only have 60 people in there at a time, and you can only be there for 30 minutes. But as I mentioned in my column, my kids don't wear watches, so I can just tell them it's been an hour and they might not know the difference. Next up, we've got a couple of new dessert places at downtown San Jose. So if you're trying to satisfy your sweet tooth this month, I know our family did a no sugar January, so we're kind of ready for this. We've got Holy Cannoli, which opened on Santa Clara Street in the old second story bakery spot close to City Hall. And they're open Wednesday through Saturday. And you can see a picture of the cannolis there. They look fantastic. And then there's a new dessert place called Natural Sweet Delight that opened in the Sofa Market on South First Street. They've got coffee, desserts, milkshakes, I think even maybe some sandwiches. And they're open with the Sofa Market 8 to 7 every day. And of course, now that the stay-at-home order has been lifted, a lot of restaurants have restarted outdoor dining. So you'll be able to see that happening on San Pedro Square and elsewhere throughout downtown. Some virtual offerings this month in honor of Black History Month. San Jose Stage has partnered with the African American Shakespeare Company on a virtual stage reading called Strange Courtesies. It's about South Africa confronting its apartheid past. Now on Wednesdays, and you can see the information there, it runs February 27th through March 3rd, and you can go to thestage.org for tickets. At the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, every Wednesday they've got their textile talks, and next week on February 10th, it's quilt artist Joe Cunningham who will be talking about creative continuity in the American quilt format. Now, of course, those take place just before our meetings, but they're hour long, start at 11. You can squeeze them in. You can go to sjquiltmuseum.org for more information on those weekly meetings. And this weekend, there's a Heart's Delight Arts Festival that'll be online featuring a lot of artists from our local collectives. And I've got the URL there, and we'll have that in the bulletin. This is on Friday and Saturday. That URL will not work until 9 a.m. Friday. So if you try it right now, it doesn't show anything worth seeing, but it should be working Friday. Now, of course, sad news is that we had a fire downtown in January, the Lawrence Archer Hotel on San Fernando Streets between 2nd and 3rd. Many of us pass it on our way to the Rotary Summit Center, built in 1893. That building has not yet been demolished. Jim Salata doesn't believe it needs to be, but it's up to the building owner, and we'll see what happens. But we also have something that we gained, and that's this wonderful Ruth Gator mural on the old Bank of the West building on Santa Clara Street. It's 5 stories high, coming from the roof of that building, and it is really amazing. A San Bruno artist made this portrait, and it's installed using vinyl, so it's not actually painted onto the building. But if you're downtown, you should check it out. And that is what we have going on, Fernando, and everyone else.
Thank you, Stel. We all remember how important cannolis are, if you can remember The Godfather. Thank you very much. We have a little bit extra time for you, Mike. Mike Conniff joined us in 2003. He's a retired professor from San Jose State. He's going to eulogize his boyhood pal, Roy Russell, who joined Rotary in 1983, the same year I did. He passed away this year. So, Mike, can you take it?
Thank you, President Fernando. This is a eulogy. Roy Russell and I were friends for 60 years and more than 60 years, really. And so I volunteered, in fact, insisted that I do the eulogy for him. Roy grew up in Kansas. When he was 13, his family moved to San Jose to start a business. Roy enrolled in Pala Middle School, where we first met. Roy blossomed at James Lick High School. He and others formed a club, Excalibur, entertained classmates, wrote for the school newspaper, played sports, and served as class leaders. The high point, one of our adventures, was the 10-day trip to Guaymas, Mexico on a 52 MG. Roy, Luis Valdez, and I agreed that that experience changed us deeply. After graduation, Roy went to Stanford and I to Berkeley, but we got together for big games and beer. Roy tired of his English lit studies at Stanford, though, as I did, so we transferred to San Francisco State to major in creative writing. We also took a PE course in boating. The final exam was sailing canoes through the notorious potato patch just outside the Golden Gate. Roy took another semester at State, then returned to Stanford and finished his BA in journalism. But in 1963, adventure called. He came to visit me in Ecuador. We made a memorable three-week trip to Buenos Aires, road trip, and went on a number of different conveyances, including this bus in Peru. Roy later earned an MA in journalism at Northwestern, where he also fell in love with and married Sally, an intelligent and lovely woman from Cleveland. After his graduation, they rented a shotgun apartment in Chicago, and he got a job in advertising. Since Roy had taken ROTC at Stanford, he went to Vietnam as a second lieutenant in the Rangers. Assigned to run the local edition of Stars and Stripes, he scoured the country for intel, not all of which made it into the paper. After military service, Roy and Sally moved to San Jose to start a family and help with Dad's soft water business. In 1972, they hitched a ride on Dad's plane to South America and joined me for Carnival in Brazil. Roy and Sally especially liked the street markets and caipirinha rum drinks there. One day our building vibrated, so we went down to explore. The favelados on our hill descended wearing skimpy outfits accompanied by roaring drums. Viva Carnival! Roy and Sally bought a home in East Side Hills where they raised two wonderful children, Sloan and David. Roy joined this club in 1983 and became an integral part of his life and civic engagement. He adored Rotary. Our semester at San Francisco State led us to buy boats, and we sailed most of the rest of our lives. In the late 1970s, Roy purchased Puff, a 22-foot sloop. When I visited San Jose, we enjoyed days on the bay. 2 times, however, we almost were swept out to sea by ebb tides. And once, when I returned to the cockpit after wrestling the jib in heavy seas, he laughed and said, "Isn't getting scared why we do this?" He passed me a beer and sheeted in the main. In the early 1990s, Roy began traveling to Vietnam seeking MIAs. He took a language course at City College and tried to assist Hill people. He felt a duty to help those who allied with our troops during the war. Roy often succeeded, as when he took Sloan to the UN to advocate for indigenous peoples and to Geneva to plead for the Montagnards before the High Commissioner for Refugees. After Roy inherited his dad's business, he decided to sell it and start Pacific Water Systems, which supplies high purity water for laboratories, factories, and hospitals. It prospered, and he hired David to handle installations and service. They were a 2-man team. One year, Roy served as president of the National Water Quality Association and later received its Regents and Merit Awards. Roy also developed a taste for classic cars, acquiring a 67 Lincoln and a 56 Jaguar. You may remember them from the Rotary barbecues. In 1997, Roy crewed on the maiden voyage of my Newport 28 sloop in Tampa. We checked out the Intercoastal Waterway, docked on Longboat Key, and found several shoals the hard way. Still, we got our mojo back after years of infrequent sailing. Roy's beloved wife, Sally, passed away in 2001, after which he began frequenting Vietnamese eateries around town. He honed his language skills and karaoke singing and involved the club's International Service Committee in Vietnam projects. He led a group study exchange there and took dozens of Rotarians for work and travel. He also managed a global grant for a village water system in northern Thailand. Roy sold Puff to me in 2002 and later helped me test sail a Hunter 33, which I bought and sailed for 12 years. Roy usually crewed on her. One trip took us up the Napa Valley, sleeping 2 nights on board. Let us pay tribute to our dear friend, compadre, shipmate, world traveler, and outstanding Rotarian. Goodbye, Roy.
Our condolences to Roy's family, about a dozen of whom were listening in on today's eulogy. Our resident pianist, Jeremy Harris, 2015. Hit it, Jeremy. Thank you. That's our traditional Rotary farewell. One of our members passes on, and we send our condolences to Roy's family, especially to Trang. Next, I have the sad duty to tell you that another one of our members, Adolph Quilici, a member since 1995, passed away on January 28th. He was from a farm in Nevada, got his BS mechanical engineering at Santa Clara University, and was 40 years with FMC. His son, Joe Quilici, also a Rotarian, will be doing a eulogy for his dad later on when we begin to meet in person. Apparently, Adolph had left a list of things for Joe to share with us. So our condolences to Adolph and his family as well. Next, we have retired hard-hitting former deputy district attorney and immediate past president Karen Sinanutari will tell us of a discreet patriotic gesture conjured up by Rotarian Shelley McNamara with help from the Fun and Friendship Committee. Karen, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you very much. And Mike, that was a fabulous eulogy. We are all going to miss Roy, and it's wonderful that his family could hear you speak about him. Well, this President's Day is coming up on February 15th, and Shelley McNamara had a great idea. And that is, we celebrate America. We all come together on President's Day and honor our presidents, past and current. So thanks to Shelley McNamara's generosity, we have 500 flags available. And Leslie email out early next week, and you will no doubt be able to find an address close to your home where you can pick up a flag. And if you need a few more for friends and family, we have them. And we're going to ask you to decorate your home with that flag. Send me a picture so we can see what everyone did on President's Day. And we will be celebrating America together. So thank you to the Fun and Friendship Committee for facilitating this idea and making Shelley's vision come true. And if you don't need a flag, please don't forget to put your own flag out on February 15th. But we will have flags available between February 11th, Thursday, and Sunday the 14th. And you will have addresses sent to you next week. Thank you very much, President Fernando.
You bet, Karen. Love that new hairdo. If you all tune in next Wednesday, you'll hear a bit of history that I think I almost can guarantee that most of you will not know what I will be telling you. Now, let me tell you about Valentine's Day. We have a program coming up next week because it's Valentine's Day after that. And I understand that Jenny Nicholas needs 2 more people. So if you're out there and you'd like to share with us a story about how your love has blossomed during this time of COVID, give her a call and tell her it's just a very brief moment that you can share with us. Also, thanks to all who answered the call and signed up to share an inspirational thought the way Suzanne St. John did, Crane. More of you are still needed, so please help, won't you? Contact Terry Austin as soon as possible. Monday, this past Monday, marked the beginning of Black History Month, so all month we'll be reminded about of our Black citizens, our brothers and sisters who have gone through an intolerable amount of misery and toil and pain to be the remarkable race that they are. On Sunday, February 14th at 5 p.m., our time, acclaimed classical pianist Katya Kreneva is giving a concert of romantic compositions via Zoom. So if you read last Friday's bulletin, you can find details in the link there. And finally, please contact Sean O'Kane if you want to play trivia tonight. That's tonight with the fun folks from the Fun and Friendship Committee. We have room for 3 or 4 people, so if you want to have some fun tonight, it'll work and you can be with us. Next, we've got our speaker to be introduced by Suzanne St. John Crane again, and that's Jeffrey Munks. He used to work here with our former Rotarian and Chief of Police, Joe McNamara, Shelley McNamara's former husband. Okay, Suzanne, can you take it over?
You bet. Thanks, President Fernando. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Monk. He's here to talk to us about Language Line, which he suggests, and you can judge, is the best story about San Jose you've never heard. After hearing the story, I think he may be right. Language Line was started in the early 80s in San Jose, and it spawned the growth of a global industry. Today, Language Line employs 11,000 on-demand interpreters, blending leading-edge technology with emotional intelligence to provide their partners translation services in, are you ready for this, 240 languages, 24/7. Jeff has held careers in government, 19 years as a police officer, 10 of which were here in San Jose, as well as in the Navy, Air Force, and Department of Defense. He's had careers in the private sector and higher education, securing venture capital funding and launching one of the world's first e-learning companies, Arista Knowledge Systems. Jeff retired 2 years ago, and oh no, he's not stopping now. He's starting yet another career as a writer. After completing 2 novels about police work, one of them apparently based on 10 years worth of crazy cases in San Jose, he's starting work on a 3rd book focusing on the history of Language Line. And it all started right here in San Jose. So please welcome a guy who's had way too many titles, so we'll stick with author and entrepreneur today, Jeffrey Monks. You're up, Jeff.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get my screen share going here. Let's see. Give me just 1 second.
You saw it there for a sec. I think it was up. The fun of technology.
Yeah, always. Oh, that's the whiteboard. You have made me co-host, correct?
You are a co-host.
You sure? Can you turn off your whiteboard?
It's all yours.
Can you see my screen now?
Nope.
We did
Did a second ago, though.
earlier.
I am terribly sorry about this.
Well, luckily, I understand you'll be able to stay after the normal ending of our program at 1:15, so you stay a little bit longer. Is that right, Jeff?
Sure. Oh, there we go.
Yep. Now
Yay.
we've got you.
All right. Can you see that all right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
see the
we-
double slides, but yeah.
You should make it full screen.
I do have it full screen for me, but let me see about this. How does that work?
There we
Perfect.
go.
There we go. Thank you ever so much, Rotarians. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to meet with you today and share, as Suzanne said, what is arguably one of the best stories about San Jose that you may have never heard. It's the story of Language Line, and it starts actually in 1971 when the United States Air Force sent me to Spain as a criminal investigator, in part because I could speak Spanish. At least I was supposed to be able to speak Spanish, having studied it for 4 years in the public schools of Palo Alto. But I arrived in Spain and found that really all I could say with confidence was, where's the library? Please pass the bread and butter. I could tell you my name was Jeff, and I could say hello to any woman named Isabel, but that was about it. 2 years later, after living in a city of 500,000 Spaniards, I had learned the language. And importantly, I had already also learned a lot about the culture. When I came back to San Jose and went to work as a police officer in a city where 25% of the population self-reported speaking Spanish in the home, I had a valuable skill set to offer to my fellow officers. Anytime any of them had a service or enforcement related contact with a resident who spoke only Spanish, I could be sent to help on the call by interpreting. Invariably, whether it took me 5 minutes to get there or 25 minutes, I'd step in between two people who were stressed, an officer and a resident who couldn't communicate. And with a few words in Spanish and a few words in English, I could build a bridge, enable the two to get their business done and get back on to their lives. It was a wonderful thing to be able to contribute, but it all changed in the early 1980s when San Jose received more than 65,000 Vietnamese refugees on the heels of the Great Boat Lift. This was not just an issue confronting the police department. It confronted every sector of society in San Jose, our schools, our healthcare system, every branch of our government, our business, and yes, even in our neighborhoods. But for cops, it was particularly difficult. Imagine yourself in the middle of the night being dispatched to a call and the details that come out say, respond to 1012 Center Road, unknown circumstances, language barrier. You don't know if you're being sent on a report of a barking dog or a man with a gun. Very, very stressful for you and very, very stressful for the residents who are seeking nothing other than help. Oftentimes, those kinds of situations devolved into physical confrontations. Sometimes people wound up going to jail for nothing more complex than an inability to communicate across the barrier imposed by language. Sometimes they went to jail by way of the hospital, and tragically, sometimes they died. It was an unacceptable situation, and having been a bilingual officer with Spanish, I knew that if I could acquire language skills with Vietnamese, I could help. So I drove south, 80 miles, to Monterey, home of the Defense Language Institute, which at the time had the largest instructional program in Vietnamese in the world outside of Vietnam. I walked into headquarters and I said, can you teach me the language? Unfortunately, they couldn't. There was no provision in federal law to help local cops. DLI existed for the military and the federal government, but they were most gracious. They gave me the textbook for Vietnamese, which was about this thick, and a box of audio cassette tapes. I went home, plugged in the first tape, opened the book, started to read it, and then closed it. That is a tough language. It was beyond my grasp. It's a tonal language. The same word can have 6 different meanings depending on inflection, tone, and pronunciation. There was no way that I could master it. So I struggled, and others struggled. We had no one in patrol, no one in dispatch who could speak the language, and more of our contacts were going dysfunctional. And as I said, it wasn't just the police department. It was happening throughout our community, and it manifested itself in many ugly ways. A lot of negative cultural stereotyping was occurring in the early 1980s in San Jose, and the police department was not immune to it. More and more officers were going home at the end of the day. Their spouse would say, as all spouses do, honey, how'd your day go today? The officer would do a recount of the 20 calls for service he or she had handled, and would focus on that one where they were forced to step across the threshold into literally another world, where things just couldn't be controlled. And the officer would say, well, my day went great, except I had to deal with another one of those so-and-sos. And the spouse on hearing that would think, this person that I married doesn't have hatred in their heart. I'm hearing the physical manifestation of the stress and frustration that my loved one is feeling over an inability to do the job they swore to do, for nothing more complex than a lack of tools. That was it. I noodled on this for a long time. And what really concerned me was not what was taking place between that couple of spouses, but what was happening around the corner in the family room, where there sat an 8-year-old coloring or doing homework, listening to mom and dad have that conversation night after night for the next 10 years, until they went out into the street as an 18-year-old, as a young adult, perhaps hating an entire group of people for what? Because they heard mom and dad having this conversation night after night after night for 10 years. Something had to be done. I had no idea what. But one night I woke up in the middle of the night, wrote a note on the pad beside my bed, went back to sleep. In the morning when I woke up, I looked at the notepad and saw the words, put it in the network. It was an epiphany and an aha moment. And I realized interpreters, that rare person who can speak and comprehend 2 different languages, in this case, English and Vietnamese, is the equivalent of a fixed location asset. He's in one place. The need in San Jose was every place. The other thing that was every place, the network. And that gave birth to the conceptual model. If I could put the resource interpreters into the network, I could bring them to bear anywhere. And with that as a conceptual model, I stepped out into the community and tried to recruit recent arrival Vietnamese refugees who could speak both English and Vietnamese, and tried to encourage them to volunteer to staff a public service that would be made available to cops in the city of San Jose. Well, shame on me. What I didn't realize at the time was that these newcomers were still at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, struggling to meet their own basic survival needs. They had not ascended yet to the point where they could embrace concepts like volunteerism. But somebody could embrace that concept. A hero walked into my life in early 1982. His name was Mike McFerrin, and that's him on the far left of this picture, that young Marine who had gone through the Defense Language Institute, learned Vietnamese, and was sent by the Marines to Vietnam, serving 2 tours as a bush Marine and an interpreter in the Hearts and Minds program. When he got out of the Marines and returned to his home in Monterey, he started helping recently arrived Vietnamese refugees deal with the government, from the local to the federal. And once a week, that resulted in him driving to San Jose to accompany Vietnamese and serve as their interpreters as they dealt with INS at the federal building on South 2nd Street. On one of those trips, he stopped by the police department headquarters building on West Mission, walked up to the information desk and said, "Can you guys use a Vietnamese interpreter?" The first cop he talked to said, "I don't know." But there was a second cop there, and that guy said, "Hey, we've got some crazy guy here who's working on that issue. Let me call him." 20 minutes later, I was in the lobby at PAB meeting with Mike McFerrin for the first time. And the 2 of us we fell in love. It was a meeting of minds. It took him about a half an hour to grasp the concept and the vision. With his organizational skills and his tenacity, he returned to Monterey, organized nearly 30 faculty members at DLI who were at the very top of Maslow's scale. These were faculty members who spoke Vietnamese as their mother tongue and had phenomenal command of English as a second language. They volunteered to be our first interpreter group. I went down to Monterey, trained them on the requirements and intricacies of interpreting for law enforcement. Then I borrowed 2 old first-generation milk bottle-sized pagers from a wonderful soul at City Communications Center, gave them to the interpreters, and put the service online. Made it available to cops out in the field, and it wasn't long before I had an opportunity to use it myself. I was out on patrol one night and got dispatched to that terrible call, 911, unknown circumstances, language barrier. Dispatch was able to tell me where the call was coming from, but no details. I and another officer arrived. We approached with caution, saw a front door open to the apartment, looked inside and saw a young Vietnamese woman on the floor in the kitchen, badly beaten, lying in a pool of her own blood. We entered the apartment, searched it, found a young man hiding under a bed in the back. Not knowing if he was a victim, witness, or suspect, because he couldn't speak English, we handcuffed him and brought him forward. Then I reached into the kitchen, took the phone off the wall, dialed the pager number for my own service, and hung up the phone. Within moments, the phone rang. I was talking with a Vietnamese interpreter. I knelt down next to the woman, asked her questions through the interpreter, put the phone up to her head, and we literally had a conversation simply by passing the telephone handset back and forth. I found out the young man was her brother. He was an innocent witness to the event. The suspect, her husband, who in a drunken rage had beaten her within an inch of her life, and then had stolen her brother's car and departed. With that information, I was able to put a bolo out to the field. Other officers quickly arrested the husband and incarcerated him. In the meantime, paramedics arrived. They were afraid to treat the woman. They were afraid to touch her. They couldn't tell whether her neck was injured, her back was injured. They couldn't get a medical history, but they saw me talking to her through the interpreter and asked if they could use the service. I handed them the phone. They used it. They treated her successfully. They transported her to the hospital, and on the way out the door, one of the paramedics turned to me and said, "That worked great. We need that service." That was my second epiphany. The need was far beyond the police department. It needed to be made available to every emergency service provider in the city of San Jose, and not just San Jose, every provider in the nation. I called Mike McFerrin after that incident and shared the revelation with him. We rededicated ourselves and formed a company in 1984 called Language Line, dedicated to eliminating language as a barrier to effective communications in the emergency services sector. We traveled the country, recruited nearly 1,400 interpreters who covered the 145 languages we discovered in our first linguistic demographic survey of the nation. And while Mike McFerrin worked on building an operations center in Monterey, I kept San Jose as my home base. And on my days off, when I was not pushing a beat car, I traveled around the nation and sold Language Line into the police departments, the 911 centers, and the major hospitals of the nation's 88 largest cities. And it worked. When it went online, the anatomy of the call was simple and elegant. A recent immigrant from the Ukraine in New York City spots a crime in progress on the streets and dials 911. She doesn't speak a word of English, but that doesn't matter. The dispatcher in Manhattan touches a button on her console. It launches a call to the operations center for Language Line in Monterey, where an answer point says, "What language do you need?" She says, "Ukrainian." The answer point touches a button on her console. That launches a call to the next available Ukrainian interpreter, who in this case is in Bozeman, Montana, but could have been anywhere in the United States and indeed anywhere in the world. With the interpreter in Bozeman connected to the dispatcher in New York City, the dispatcher is able to find out what happened, what the bad guy looks like, what direction he's headed in, and dispatch the right resources. Total time it took to connect the interpreter was about 12 seconds. With those 88 major cities using Language Line, we came to the attention of AT&T. And in 1989, AT&T acquired Language Line lock, stock, and barrel. It was the very first acquisition in the 100-year history of that company. And using their resources, we grew the business nearly 4,000% in 5 years. My hero and my partner on the acquisition, Mike McFerrin, rode off into the sunset with his wife and kids. They moved out to Carmel Valley and raised chickens and horses. I left San Jose PD and jumped into AT&T Language Line full-time with the acquisition, taking responsibility for marketing, sales, product management, and strategic communication and planning. We grew that business, as I said, more than 4,000% in 5 years, thanks in large part to the muscle that AT&T brought to us, which enabled us to get into just about every major media worldwide. Along the way, we were awarded the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, and the California Golden State Quality Award for the best service business of any size in California. LanguageLine, through the years, has gone through several acquisitions. I left in 1996 to do other things that Suzanne so graciously alluded to. But today, LanguageLine is owned by a Paris-based company called Teleperformance. It currently employs 14,000 interpreters covering 240 languages and handles more than 40 million requests for interpretation every year. The calls they handle range from the mundane to the miraculous. The service literally saves lives in hospitals around the world every day of the week, on the streets of cities around the world every day of the week. As long as I live, I'll always fondly remember one call that's very indicative of the type of service that this unique business provides. 1995, I was in our comm room. A call came in and a flag went up. Call takers would raise a flag when it was an incredible call that they were handling. I went over and plugged in and listened as a 50-year-old woman from Connecticut called and said, "I am not a customer of yours, but I read about you in the local newspaper. Our city subscribes so that seniors who speak no English can gain access to city services. When I saw what you do, I thought, if I can call you and get an interpreter, and if she's still alive, perhaps I can find my mother." That's when the flag went up. The woman said, "At the end of World War II, I was 8 years old. The town I lived in had been destroyed. There were no medical services, very little food, no help whatsoever. I lived with my mother and my aunt. I was sick, malnourished. I remember my mother and aunt saying, if they kept me, I would die. My mother walked me to the train station and gave me to an American military family of the occupation. I was brought to America, raised American. I love my American family. I speak only English, but I remember my mother. If I can get an interpreter from you, I'd like to try to find her." So we reached out to Bellevue, Washington, picked up the next available Japanese interpreter, and led a call to Tokyo operator assistance. The interpreter gave operator assistance the name of the small town outside Tokyo and the woman's last name. And within moments, the phone was ringing. It was answered by the aunt. This woman, 58 years old now, in Connecticut, Japanese American, was speaking to her aunt just outside of Tokyo. And the two, through our interpreter, they did not speak the same language, had a tearful, joyous reunion. They were crying and laughing. And I got to tell you, so was I. And the aunt told her, when your mother returned from the train station that day 50 years ago, she was in tears. She knew she had made a mistake. Together, we ran back to the train station to get you, but you were gone. Your mother started saving her money. 5 years after the war, she traveled to America looking for you. She's gone back to America every 5 years since, looking for you. As we speak, she's in New York City, looking for you. The aunt was able to give us the name of the hotel and the phone number. We dropped the connection to Japan, called the hotel in New York City. The mother answered. And through our interpreter, we reconnected her Japanese-speaking mother with a 58-year-old English-speaking daughter who had been apart for all those years. Why? Because they couldn't speak the same language. And as long as I live, I'll never forget that. And I remember thinking at the time, if I accomplish nothing else in my life, I'm delighted to have been able to contribute to making that connection possible. And you just would not believe how many children of that war, Japanese, Italian, and German, LanguageLine has brought back together with their families. And in closing, I'd just like to say, what you're looking at right now, it all began here in the streets of San Jose. The challenge that created LanguageLine has not gone away. This is but a partial list of the languages spoken in the homes, businesses, and streets of San Jose today. Do many of these people also speak English? Sure. But in times of crisis and in times of stress, people speak most effectively in the language they think emote, and make decisions in. And if we're truly committed to the principles that this country was founded on, those of due process and equal access, we now have the means to let them do so. And that concludes my remarks. I thank you, Rotarians, for your time and your gracious hospitality. Be happy to answer any questions.
Wow. Knocked it out of the park there, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. That was really amazing. That was amazing. That story's going to stick with me, boy. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And now we do have a few questions from our audience here. The first is funny. I was typing this for you, and then Heather Lerner beat me to it. Is there a language, as we talk about, police possibly being, law enforcement possibly partnering, say, with mental health professionals to go on calls? I mean, it may not be a different language, but it kind of is, right? In terms of going to a mental health call or a situation with domestic violence. So is there currently a language line, right, for populations that need non-traditional interpretations? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's an excellent idea. And when you talk about non-traditional languages, Language Line as a service handles more than 240 languages, including American Sign and many Native American languages. As far as bringing in specialized mental health care and other services, the Language Line itself is not set up to do that, but there's no reason why a model like Language Line can't be adapted to invoke people with specialized skills and service providers who could be brought to bear through the network.
Right. Thank you for that. Another question, what leadership and entrepreneurial lessons can you share about, when you had the idea and you thought, am I nuts? Is this something that could actually go somewhere? The other people on the police force think I'm crazy, but who's this crazy guy working on this? What are the lessons that you can share with us about, deciding to take that risk, even when people didn't think it was worth taking?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I appreciate it, Suzanne. And you're right. I was told by no fewer than 35 venture capitalists, private equity groups, banks, and others that it was a crazy idea. What we were proposing to do was resolve the riddle of the Tower of Babel. And I think the most salient and impactful thought I can share is simply perseverance and belief in the cause. This was truly a passion play. It was something that needed to be done. One of the benefits that spun out of it is, when you think about it, Language Line evolved to become absolutely the most diverse organization in the world. Language Line's employees represent 240 different cultures. I had a wonderful opportunity to jump into the deep end of the pool and learn what it means to lead, to follow, to collaborate, cooperate, and communicate across the various, some would characterize as barriers, I would characterize them as opportunities, represented by different languages and cultures. It demonstrated to me the incredible power and strength of the diversity of our nation. Language Line is a knowledge-based business, and it's the strength of its people representing all those languages and cultures that makes it possible to facilitate more than 40 million communication events every year.
That is wild. How did you, in the beginning too, especially, how did you find the translators that you use, and how did you manage their availability to take those calls? Like, how did that work?
Right. After doing a linguistic demographic analysis of the country and determining the languages that we needed, we first traveled to the nation's major city court centers, major city medical centers, to New York, to Washington, D.C., and to other major commercial centers where there were concentrations of interpreters. And we recruited them with a very unique value proposition. We told them, look, in your regular day job, you are place and domain constrained. You have to go into the court every day. Even if they only use you for 10 minutes as an interpreter, you have to sit there all day. But when you're home, if you want, you can dial into our switch, log in, be available to take calls as often as you want, and we'll train you to work in different domains. It was a brand new model. So no longer are you just a court interpreter. You can learn medical interpretation because we would train you. You could get certified as a medical interpreter. You can interpret for business, we'll train you. You can interpret for public utilities, we'll train you. So it became an exciting new avenue for the interpretation industry worldwide. And it actually spawned the birth of a global multi-billion-dollar industry that LanguageLine dominates as the only company. I mean, it's larger than its four next competitors combined, but there are hundreds of competitors worldwide. It's a vibrant new way of doing business if you're a language professional.
At what point did you start paying the actual interpreters? Like in the beginning, you said you started as
Right.
having volunteers, obviously, but
Right.
I assume they're paid.
Right. 1983, 1994, we were still a volunteer operation. And I got a phone call from a commander in the California Highway Patrol who said, we use your service out on the freeway, I-5, south of Sacramento, all the time, dealing with Armenian and Azerbaijani speakers. It works so well that we want to open it up to the whole state, but we'll only do that if you can guarantee that your interpreters are always there in any language that we need. Boy, I'll tell you, that caused us to have to really take a deep breath and commit. It was the tipping point. We decided to lean forward. We transitioned all our interpreters from volunteers to paid staff. We recruited aggressively. We went back to the Highway Patrol and said, we can do this. They did a contract with us. We did it. They loved it. They became a reference customer. And before long, we had nearly every 911 center and police department in the United States as subscribing customers to LanguageLine. Just about every single one of the nation's nearly 8,000 hospitals, more than 3,000 hotels, and we were on our way.
Wow. So the question begs to be asked, I think this is from Dan Polcrano, I was thinking the same thing, is the business going to be replaced with computerized voice recognition, synthesis and translation systems, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's one I've been asked for nearly 38 years. And it's one I've been studying for nearly 38 years, including on a 10-month fellowship, Mellon Fellowship at the National Foreign Language Center in Washington, D.C., looking at the state of the art of what's called machine translation and AI interpretation. My answer for you is both of those technologies have wonderful promise and they are being put to good use. In a controlled domain with controlled vocabulary, like for technical translation on machine parts, yeah, there's all kinds of applications. But when it comes to human beings communicating with each other in times of crisis, there's no way any machine can get closer than a purported 80% accuracy. And in a life or death situation, if you're a doctor, are you going to trust an interpretation that's only reported to be 80% accurate? How does the machine tell the difference between blue as in I blew my nose, blue as in the color blue, blue as in I'm feeling blue? It's just too far a bridge to cross. That being said, I'm all for embracing the positive, constructive uses of machine translation and AI interpretation. But nothing, I think, is ever going to replace the human touch and the human brain when it comes to those most critical of communicative events. The service is used in much more than just business. Consumers use it as well. I can't tell you how many times the service has been used by single men and women around the world trying to get to know somebody who speaks another language.
Yeah.
And they appreciate, literally, no pun intended, the intimacy of human interpretation versus machine interpretation. So from the casual to the clinical, I believe there's always going to be the need for human-based interpretation. And that's evidenced by the continued rapid growth of LanguageLine and its industry.
That's great. Yeah, based on how Siri does with interpreting what I'm saying, I think we got a ways to go. God knows what God knows what doctors or might think that my problem is based on what Siri can hear me saying.
Yeah.
Another question for you, and this is a bit of a different subject. It's somebody that I think was reading your bio and some of your history. Can you talk about your landmine project in Bosnia?
Sure. In 2009, Bosnia and Herzegovina was falling way behind in their commitment to the international community and the European Union to clear landmines following the war of the middle 90s. At that time, in 2009, there were still approximately 5,000 landmines and unexploded ordnance in the ground in that country, mostly in the eastern part. As a result of the settlement, when the Serbs lost, the Bosnians turned over all of their maps of where their landmines had been. The Serbs burned theirs. And so entire swaths of the country were unmapped, and landmines were discovered when an old man would go into a forest and try to chop wood and step on one, or a child would go into a field and play soccer and step on one. It was a horrible situation. The United States Partnership for Peace Training and Education Center and the United States Department of Defense asked me if I would create a program to try to help the 30 or so agencies that were working to demine Bosnia and Herzegovina do so faster and more efficiently. There were a lot of turf battles. A landmine would go off and kill somebody. The local police would come out, the Civil Protection Directorate would come out, the Bosnian Armed Forces would come out, the UN would come out, and they'd all start arguing about who was in charge. So I created, working with the faculty from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, a program called Collaborative Strategic Leadership in Complex Environments. And the program was exactly as the title sounds. Took it over there, and over the course of 3 years, implemented it with the strategic leaders of those 30 organizations. It was a lot of fun. I think we did a lot of good. At the end of 3 years, we turned over the keys to the program to the Bosnians, and they're still practicing it. And it has helped them not only accelerate the removal of landmines, but secure new sources of funding to do that desperately needed work.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic. Would an Uber for interpreters app emerge to even broaden such language interpretation services? It probably already exists, but your thoughts on that question?
You know, wherever I travel in the world, I bring the language access app with me. So with one touch on my phone, I'm able to invoke an interpreter no matter where I am on the planet. I've used it in China. I've used it in Bosnia. I've used it in Japan. I've used it in Rio, and I've used it many, many times in taxis. I used it in Nashville, Tennessee, which I don't know if you're aware, but Nashville has the largest population of Kurds in the world outside of northern Iraq. And I used it with a taxi driver who just absolutely went crazy. He couldn't believe that I was giving him the ability to speak his own language in Nashville. So now he's using it. So yeah, by word of mouth, I think it's virally moving within and throughout the transportation sector.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That's been a fascinating recount of a wonderful idea. You have opened up a lot of ideas. I think you're going to be able to stay with us after we close the formal part of the program. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I'd be delighted to. Thank you.
Great. I wrote the language need of court interpreters. I helped write the bill that's currently the law that requires certification of language interpreters in the criminal courts because of the same issues that you identified. It's just that you were smarter than I was. You monetized it, whereas mine was all volunteers. Listen, we instead of paying you, what we've done is we've contributed on your behalf to our city forest, a nonprofit locally here that'll plant some 46 shade trees out in East San Jose to combat the heat islands and the climate change and to improve their neighborhoods, provide some habitat for birds and wildlife in your name. So thank you very much for that, Jeff. You know, this is an amazing country, and you identified just in that list of languages that you found in San Jose to illustrate the diversity of our particular state. I don't know how other states compare with respect to that diversity, but certainly we have a lot of languages used here. And you go to Kaiser and you'll see a whole list of their languages, if you get their bills, that says that they say are available. So that was a great idea of yours to go to the medical centers and to the courts and to the commercial centers across the country to find interpreters and translators. Thank you very much, Jeff. Let me wrap it up here by saying that next week it will be our Valentine's Day program with several of our Rotarians sharing their love during the time of COVID-19. So to paraphrase my favorite immigrant governor, hasta la vista, Rotarians, this Zoom meeting stands adjourned. But we can continue now with Jeff. So Suzanne, you got some more questions for him?
I think there are a couple more here. Jeff, somebody wanted to know if we as individuals can buy the app, and how much does it cost for an individual membership?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, 3 years ago, I started working with another company that's an aggregator of companies like LanguageLine called RTT Mobile Interpretation. They're one of the many, many companies that are in this space. I encourage you to either go to Google Play or to the App Store, or just go to Google itself and search for language interpretation apps. There are many of them. Some you can download for free, and you can gain access to an interpreter through the equivalent of a prepaid card. Others require you to put a credit card in and bill you for the minute by the minute for actual time online with an interpreter. But boy, there's a lot of them out there. I've tried many. I have, the one that I use, which is provided by RTT, but I encourage you to explore them all. They all use essentially the same interpreters. It's a wonderful group of people who are literally doing the Lord's work.
Wow.
Yes, the short answer is yes, you can get an app and download it to your phone.
Okay, do you still have the milk bottle size pagers? I was dying to ask that question because if you do, I want to see one.
I'll tell you, I wish I had kept them. And in our very first communication center, we bought two 1932 Western Electric cord ports, the kind that you used to see Lily Tomlin plugging in on Laugh-In. And that's what was supporting LanguageLine for call completion with interpreters all over the world until we were acquired by AT&T and were able to bring in the most sophisticated technology on the planet. So yeah, I wish I had those old artifacts, but sadly I don't.
Be great for the Computer History Museum or something.
Yes.
Maybe have them there. Open it up for any other questions, guys. I don't need to facilitate this necessarily. Totally up to anybody else has questions.
Jeff, when you were in Spain and you went to Saragossa, you went to the Saragossa Air Base there.
Correct.
Did you find out how the name Saragossa came about?
No, I don't know what the history of the name is, although I do know that the city dates back to, Moorish times and before, actually Roman times. I walked down cobblestone streets that had chariot ruts in them.
Yeah. Spain was a favored location for retired army Romans. And so the Roman legions would be given some land out in Spain. And one of them put up a statue for Caesar Augustus, Cesar Augusta. And from there, Cesar Augusta became Saragossa. And there's a statue of him near the amphitheater there in Saragossa that they've unearthed when it was a riverbank town back in the time of the Roman legions. Anyway, back to the rest of our members who have questions. Do you have any there, Suzanne? Anybody else come on?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you were to project 10 or 20 years into the future, what do you think this technology will look like and how will it be used? You obviously had a tremendous amount of foresight to do what you did. So now let's pretend you're 20 and 25 and you're going to go into this business and you want to change it for the future. What do we do?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Roman. I think I've seen the answer to that question. I mentioned that company, RTT. They have just developed and produced a brand new device. It's about the size, a little bit bigger than a deck of cards. It has scalable directional microphones on it that have noise cancellation capabilities. And it has an incredible ceramic speaker that can throw a crystal clear voice more than 50 feet. It addresses the issue of ambient noise in external and internal environments. So equipped with that, I could literally have it on my pocket. I could go out, say as a police officer, into a crowded emergency situation that's filled with people who spoke only Hmong. And I could have an interpreter through that device, and I could say, tell these people they need to move over the side to the sidewalk. There's the risk of an explosion from natural gas. And this voice would come out of that speaker loud enough for people 30, 40 yards away to hear and render my instructions in Hmong. And if I pointed the device at one of them, it would, like a rifle shot through the crowd, cancel all other noise and hear that person's voice 30, 40, 50 feet away. So the interpreter could pick it up and relay it to me. Those kinds of advances in hardware and software and technology extend the reach and the use. And the immediate applications are for people like highway patrol officers on the side of a busy freeway where semi-trucks are rolling by, field supervisors in a noisy environment where people don't speak the same language, or on a factory floor, out in the open ocean in difficult circumstances where there's a lot of noise. That's one of the most exciting developments I've seen recently. And I think there's many more in the pipeline upstream.
Carmen,
Is it you? Go ahead.
You got a follow up there, Art? Because Carmen's got her hand up too.
No, take her and then come back to me if you have time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was Carmen.
That's okay. Carmen, go ahead.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you for the presentation. What we are doing is I am discovering the power of podcasts and videos because it's more intimate for people to listen to a podcast. And we are having the challenge in our organization that people is contacting me from different parts of the world saying I have a panic attack, or I witness my friend or family or husband or having a panic attack, what I do. So now I get inspired by your presentation to think about not only English and Spanish, to think about translating those materials into many other languages.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. I applaud the thought and any effort that goes along with it. It's remarkable what we can accomplish when we reach out to embrace our entire constituency, not just those who speak a single language.
Awesome. Arthur, did you have a follow up there? And then I think Steve, did you want to jump in after? Yeah.
Yes.
Arthur?
To what extent is this used in ESL education? You know, if you have a classroom with kids that speak 6 different languages, or adults that speak 6 different languages, the teacher obviously doesn't speak all those languages, but it would be helpful to be able to communicate with each of those people on an individual basis. To what extent have the schools bought into this, either private or public or colleges?
That's an excellent question. San Antonio, Texas, 127 different languages in one school district. They bought into it. DeKalb County, around Atlanta, Georgia, similar demographics. They bought into it. More and more schools are discovering it, and I'm delighted to see that happen. And I'll tell you, you touch on a great subject, the whole issue of second language instruction in this nation. Shame on us for not taking greater advantage of the fact that we have language-defined communities of interest that could form the basis for immersion opportunities for our students who want to attack with a commitment to mastery languages in the strategic national interest, like Cantonese, Korean, Japanese, Arabic, Farsi, Dari, Russian, not to mention Spanish, and so many others. Our reliance on rote instruction in the classroom just ignores the tremendous richness and diversity of that exists in our communities that could be brought to bear to help our children learn a second language, which is a cornerstone of success, I think, in a global environment.
Yeah, well said. Steve.
Yes, well, first off, let me applaud what you just said, Jeffrey. That's just huge. In terms of diversity and inclusion, the willingness or the ability for our people to speak multiple languages is just huge. I had a question. When you were with San Jose PD, and you guys started up the program, any idea or estimate of how many lives might have been saved as a result of being able to figure out exactly what was being said?
Yes, I counted 3 in the first 6 months and countless saves. And the law of unintended consequence. I told you about that paramedic. What I didn't tell you was I was out on patrol one day and I got dispatched to return a phone call to a doctor at Alexian Brothers Hospital. I pulled over, went to a phone booth, called the doctor. As soon as he came on the line, he started yelling at me. And I didn't know him from Adams off Ox, but he said, "Look, a Vietnamese accident victim was brought into the ER and I'm the head doctor in the ER. I couldn't touch the guy. I couldn't ask him if the drugs I wanted to inject would kill him. I couldn't get a medical history. I knew nothing about what was wrong with him." And a cop waltzed in, picked up the phone on the wall, interviewed him about the car accident he was in and left. He said, "I need access to that service." So we gave him access. A week later, the same doctor called me back again, and again, he was yelling at me. He said, "You need to do this in Spanish," because we were just doing it in Vietnamese. And I said, "Aren't we effectively bilingual in California with Spanish?" And he said, "We may well be, but when the only Spanish interpreter I trust when my hands are inside a patient's body is in the operating room for 3 hours, and I'm in the ER and I need help now, I'm not going to settle for a housekeeper who speaks Spanish but knows nothing about medical practice. I need a professional interpreter. That's what you guys do. Get us Spanish." And that really opened the aperture to the global need, not just in terms of geography, but in terms of languages that were.
That's exactly what happened with the court system.
Yes.
The court system, the people would be doing the interpreting, and they took umbrage at the fact that I was trying to set up a process by which you could evaluate the competency, the language fluency of individuals. And one guy said, "I don't know who you are and why you're doing this, but I've been doing this for 25 years, and I'd be damned if I'm going to have to go through a certification process." I said, "Well, if you've been doing it for so long, I'm sure you'll do very well." This guy was the guy that, in Spanish, by the way, in Visalia, who the judge asked through the interpreter, "How do you declare yourself? Do you declare yourself guilty or not guilty?" And the interpreter turned to the defendant and says, "¿Cómo te declaras, guiltón o no guiltón?" So it was a very chopped up, clearly a disservice to the defendants and to the judicial system, but things are much, much improved now with respect to that. But unfortunately, it's only in the criminal courts that you require language certification.
Right. Well, President Fernando, you might be interested to know that with Language Line, only 1 in 12 interpreter applicants possess the qualifications and are able to pass the initial screening to get to the point where they actually have a chance to go through a formal interpreter training program. Only 1 out of 12.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember in high school, I wasn't allowed to take Spanish in school because he said, "Well, you already speak it." I didn't know enough then to say, well, my mom never told me about habeas corpus or all these other languages that exist within language. So anyway, listen, you've done a heck of a job. And I don't know if there are any other questions out there from our audience, because I don't want to cut them off if they have some questions. Suzanne, what do you know?
I don't see any at this point. Yeah,
right. Well,
that was the last one.
Well, I just got one comment. Fernando, I took Spanish in college, and there were a number of Hispanic kids in our class. and most of them did not do as well in a college course as us non-native speakers did, because we were learning formal Spanish and they were speaking everyday Spanish without all the rules of grammar. And so, you know, telling somebody that it's all changed now, hopefully, but
No,
telling
it's
you
still
you
the case.
couldn't take it.
People still say, yes, I'm bilingual. They misunderstood in Yolo County when the county realized that they had this issue. And so they started giving what they called incentive pay to those who were bilingual. Well, they didn't specify bilingual in Spanish. So people that spoke Greek, people that spoke Armenian applied for their differential. And of course, they succeeded because nobody told them you had to have been bilingual in one particular language. So they learned to be more specific. Jeff, you've been a wonderful resource. You know, Joe McNamara was one of our very best and most favorite police chiefs, and you were lucky to have worked with that guy. He was a terrific man.
I agree.
We appreciate the work that you've done. You've done a great service to not just our people here in the United States, but across the world. I mean, you are a bridge that has helped countless of people be able to communicate, which is the most essential part of looking for peace, I'm sure. So thanks very much, and I look forward to reading about you in the papers again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thanks
all.
so much. Appreciate it,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Good talking to you and seeing you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Suzanne.
All right,
Appreciate
be
it.
well.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Suzanne.